what you want, when you want it, where you want it. This is The Mesh.
Brothers in Tech is a weekly podcast focused on personal and home technology, helping provide you, our fellow brothers and sisters in tech, with some information, assistance, and recommendations. There is no shortage of news content for our consumption, and no shortage of methods for consuming it. However, the brothers believe that there are some apps or services that are better suited than others for you to access quality information. So with an expert on communication by our side, the brothers discuss their suggestions and their must-haves for apps and services to help you take hold of your news intake. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Brothers in Tech here on themesh.tv, ongoing podcast talking about home, family, personal technology, and helping those of you that may be the go-to IT person in your own family. Helping you get stronger and more knowledgeable in the tech area, maybe also being a good resource for those of you that are the ones calling those other family members for questions and help. Maybe we can help you be a little more self-sufficient going forward. My name's Alan Jackson, one of the three brothers in tech you're going to meet in this episode. On the other side of the webcam from me here is Brian Jackson, my natural-born brother. Brian, how you doing?
Man, I'm not doing too well today.
Really?
No, actually, I always say I'm doing well, so I thought I'd shake it up a little bit. I'm doing fine.
You did.
Doing fine.
You threw me off for a second there.
Yeah, no, I'm doing okay. I'm excited for another episode. It feels like I don't know, not that long ago that I saw you across the screen, and excited to chat with you. Family good? Everybody's good?
Yeah, everybody's good.
Yeah.
Everybody's good. We're in the midst of we've got of the three boys right now, two of them are in college and pursuing their stuff. The third one is now applying to go and leave us early.
I don't blame them.
Going to 2 years of high school at School of the Arts possibly is what they're trying.
Yep.
And so my wife and I are going ahead and trying to get used to the idea that we may be empty nesters a couple years ahead of schedule. So I don't know how that's going to go.
Well, every time I talk to your sons, and I just keep telling them, get out. Yeah. So I can see how this is happening.
They're desperately trying. I don't know why. They keep saying, Dad, we've got to get out of here. So no, anyway, but everybody's good. Everybody's fine.
Yeah.
I'm happy with that.
Well, that's good. We just caught up on our family, so that's good. Yeah,
your family's good.
Oh, you want to ask about mine too? Okay. Yeah. No, I'm good. Thank you. Yeah.
I understand that's the thing you're supposed to do when somebody asks about you. You're supposed to reciprocate and ask about them.
So happy to be here with you, Alan. So happy. But I'm really happy the fact that we actually have another brother here. So go ahead.
He's joining us again. If you listened last week, you heard us have him with us. And it is our, again, brother from another mother, guy we both grew up with, known for a good while, but is just as much of a tech fan as we are. John Mims. He's a professor at High Point University. And John, we're happy to have you here with us again.
Hey, thanks for having me again, guys. I'm glad that I broke the internet with the last episode, and so many people downloaded it. That you guys decided to have me back. So really
servers crashed. I mean, it was bad, but we're going to roll the dice and have you on again just to kind
huge.
of So it was good. We need the numbers, is what it is. We need the numbers, and we thought, how do we get the numbers? Got to bring back Mims.
Got to bring up Mims. Mims is the key.
I'm offering extra credit to my students to listen to the podcast, and so
Oh, you do that as well.
That's good. 20 points for and there's a quiz at the end, but that's
Perfect.
I'll say, that's good. You take it a little further than I just give them extra credit for downloading it. I don't actually make them listen to it. I just want the numbers of downloads.
Well, I think what we're learning right now is that if we ever want to increase our downloads, we just keep every week inviting more and more college professors who can require downloads as part of their requirements.
Although we keep coming to small college professors, we need to go to like big college professors that have hundreds and hundreds of students, right?
Have you seen the number? High Point University is.
I get that. but we got to keep jacking it up here. So
yeah. Well, guys, all right. This is also fitting to have John here because John, you are a professor at High Point University, and you're in the areas of public relations and social media, and that was kind of one of the reasons we wanted to talk a little bit today about news. It's no secret that people are tending to get their news from a lot of different sources. Mobile devices, computing devices being one of those more readily available ones. We're going to talk about those news apps and services, but we just want to kind of give a little bit of an overview and primer on kind of where the world of viewing and reading news is these days and what's going on. And we thought, well, John, this is some of the stuff you teach and you educate and work with. So we hope you can regale us with your knowledge in this area, and as we can talk a little bit about news here in the.
I shall put on my hat and mortarboard and tassel, and she'll begin. But what's amazing is this scares the heck out of me. There's a report that came out in the beginning of this year that 36% of adults, now these aren't kids, adults are getting their news primarily from Facebook.
Oh my gosh.
And so now
that's a problem, or what?
Well, what happens is that with Facebook has this nice algorithm that we know some about, but I mean a lot of it's kind of a secret. I mean it's a trade secret, but when you like something, Facebook says, "Oh, okay, Alan likes this. Let's show Alan more stuff that he likes." And so what happens is if Alan likes a news article about the Earth being flat, the next thing Alan gets are more articles about the Earth being flat. And the next thing you know, you're Kyrie Irving.
And you're not getting a paycheck, right? Very nice.
Yeah. But you're basically, what happens is your news is based on what you like, and it doesn't give you in a lot of cases, the other side, because what the other thing that's happening in our news is that news outlets are catering to specific audiences. I mean, and that's not necessarily new, but what's happening is we're actually starting to recognize it. So, I mean, big picture, we see, like Fox News typically caters to conservative, CNN more to a liberal crowd. I mean, and that's kind of the big picture, but there are a lot more details. I mean, it goes a lot more. It goes to a lot more specific news types of news that people get. And so when we get our news from a place like Facebook, for example, that chooses based on what we like, then we're only going to get one type of news. We're not going to see the other types of news. And so, as we talk about these aggregators, they do a really good job of giving me the news that I want to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is that always, but that's not necessarily all the news I need to have.
Right.
That's
because that doesn't make me a very informed consumer. And so, that's Apple Apple News does a great job of telling me all the news about Apple computers. PCs can have the best tech out there. I'll never know about it because I don't.
That's true.
I mean, because I don't ever see anything about that.
Because you didn't click a button saying, "Hey, go ahead and give me information about this," or news articles about this topic as well. You pick the topics you're interested in, and that's now what's going to be driven to you primarily. So, John, I'm just curious. I mean, before we kind of talk about specifics about some of the programs, but going back to your note about Facebook, and I think I know the answer to this, but why is it that so many people are using Facebook, an app that was really designed for sharing and connecting with people? Why do you feel like that has just become such a prominent news source for people now? I mean, is it people seeking out news there, or is it just that they happen to already be there and that's now where news can funnel to them?
Well, Facebook at its core is really about sharing information. I mean, and that's what in the beginning it was about me sharing, pictures of my kids as they were born, and I share it with my parents. Well, in a lot of cases, I'll get a lot of likes whenever I share a picture of my kids. Where I can get more likes is in sharing something that's controversial. Mm-hmm. And so, and one of the things that you learn in communication, if you have a little bit of controversy, it will breed more viewers and readers. And so, we see a lot of news articles that are, we call them clickbait, which are the headline is so inflammatory that you just got to click to see what they're talking about. Well, we actually do that within our own news feeds because we want people to read our stuff. I mean, there are a lot of studies about how we are physically satisfied by getting likes on Facebook and Instagram and et cetera. And so, for a lot of people, the way they do that is by sharing news that might be controversial or that they think that their friends will agree with. And so what happens is because of that algorithm, basically I'm seeing the news, whether it's news from a news source or news about somebody's family, from the people that I typically agree with.
Yeah.
And
so it's almost like a version of groupthink. I mean, it's this idea that, like we used to say, like in a workplace or other communal group, where if you're surrounding yourself with people that are all saying the same thing, then you obviously are going to start saying the same thing as well, because that's the people you're around. That's the ones who are feeding you this information.
Exactly. We call it the echo chamber. So that's really all it is. If I say something and you agree with me, well, then I must be right. Right. It doesn't matter that I'm a moron and you're a moron and all of our friends are morons, and the people who really know what they're talking about aren't seeing our stuff to tell us, hey, you guys are morons.
Yeah.
So
right.
That's the challenge with news and social media. So then, as we look at what we call an aggregator, and let's say we can get past the idea of using Facebook as our news source. Let's say if somebody's saying, "Look, I do want to try to find news. I really want to see news from sources I can kind of trust, and I want to have a more direct news feed to me." There are services out there now that allow you to kind of take these different news sources and it's called aggregation. This idea of taking, if there's 20 different news sources that you might read from, it brings them all together into one interface, one tool, one service, one place to see them. On the surface, that sounds really good. That sounds like, hey, I'm being a smarter news reader because I'm going to use an aggregator and I'm going to get it from a lot of different sources. My guess is, to kind of stay on the same topic, that's still not 100% foolproof yet, because there's still some self-selection of the things you want to see and hear going on, right? Most certainly. Well, I use the Apple News, and so I select the topics I'm most interested in. So, I'll pick tech, a little bit of politics, sports. The big. I really am a news junkie, so I actually like to choose news outlets that cater to the different political spectrums just to see how they compare to one another.
Sure.
But a lot of people don't do that. I don't think that they would choose the news outlet probably that would carry their political views. And so there again, it really does narrow down what they see. Now, what's the difference between using an aggregator and only going to Fox or only going to MSNBC? What's the difference between doing it that way? And there's really isn't one. The difference is that the aggregator is going to pull those things, but it'll also occasionally throw in something from maybe a news outlet that you don't necessarily select. And so, there is the benefit there, but I'm sure, not knowing how they use their algorithm, I'm sure that it has to do with the number of people that actually read stories. They probably test some stories. Here we'll give this to, 200,000 people. And if, some of them read it, then we'll add it to another 300,000 more. But, it's really hard to say because we don't know how that aggregator works.
Right.
And shouldn't we also kind of clarify between aggregator and curator, right? There's a difference between aggregator, meaning they're bringing lots of things in together, you're not just going to CNN.com and reading only CNN stuff. You're getting Fox, CNN, AP News, Washington Post, all of these things together. But curator, that's where I think it gets a little bit questionable, right? Curating is when somehow it's tweaking what it thinks you want to see or you need to see, right? And that's always been kind of the piece about a lot of these news services or news aggregators is like, hey, we curate really, really well. I mean, Apple News right up front was like, our curation is super good in that we understand what it is that you need to see, right? And but then anytime you get a chance to curate what you're seeing, you're also going right back to the Facebook issue, which is, am I just creating an echo chamber, right? Which I think is one of the challenges of all of this, right?
Well, and quite frankly, we can't have just curate or just aggregated news. There's too much out there. I mean, there's just so much stuff that would be interesting to us. So we have to narrow it down. The question is, you're right, is how is it narrowed down? And in a lot of ways, we don't know. I mean, and that's the reality of it. I mean, there are different things that happen. I mean, even Google searches, there are questions about, why is this Google search giving me this response instead of this one? Is it based on somebody at Google making a decision? Well, I mean, the same thing can be said about a lot of these news aggregators. Why are they giving more points to this article by this reporter as opposed to this article by this reporter? So, it really is, there are a lot of challenges there. And, I do like the fact that in a lot of cases, especially with Apple News, it will try to give me, like if I've chosen a bunch of different outlets, it'll actually give me from a bunch of different outlets. I mean, it'll choose from those outlets. It won't really go heavy on one or the other. Yeah, and I appreciate that because that's really what I want. And part of that could, maybe the reason that happens is because I'll click on stories from different news sources as well.
Yeah. And to me, I think that's what's really key about all of these is if you can get a news aggregator or curator, or curator that actually gives you things from lots of different places, but gives you things that you're willing to click on, regardless of who's writing it, regardless of where it's coming from, and saying, that's the information I want to learn about, right? Then I think that's really helpful. I would say, John, going back to your question of can you actually have an aggregator, that's not curated? And that's probably true, right? But let's think back a little bit to where we used to get our news, right? We used to get our news on the local news channel. And that was usually, I mean, not necessarily all the time, but that was non-political for the most part. It was like, okay, we're just giving you the big news, giving you the big ideas. And then then we got competing news sources. And then we got to the point where now giving one news article is actually inflammatory to another group. And so therefore what you're looking for is, rather than looking for the competing ideas, you're looking for the inflammatory, the way you can get the argument for your particular point, right? And I think that's where a lot of people have gotten to. So, my big thing with news is recently been, I would like to find sources that will do a good job of giving me variety and allow me to choose the topic, not necessarily the sources, right? I want someone to choose I want to say technology, politics, sports, and I want to see a lot of different viewpoints on those things, but not being able to say, I want CNN or I want Fox or I want this, because that starts to put me down a rabbit hole, right? Which I'm a little bit concerned about.
Well, the other problem with news is that there's so much of it.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about when we were talking about the local news, we had 30 minutes of national news with Tom. Well, actually, it started at 6, didn't it, with the local news? Mm-hmm. And then at 6:30, we had Tom Brokaw or Dan Rather or Peter Jennings giving us 30 minutes of national news. Now, I mean, in this moment, I've got 5 channels of, BBC, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, CNN headline news. I mean, at Fox, I mean, there are tons of these channels, and they have to fill all this, all that time with news. And so in a lot of cases, it becomes opinion mixed in with the news. And so that's where it becomes problematic. But the problem is that we have to create so much of it, and they have to get people to listen to it and read it. or watch it.
Yeah.
So you're right about the inflammatory. That's the only reason that we want to read something is because we want to either be made happier or angrier. That's really how the news affects us.
That's very true. Well, and it's really the reason I think all those media sources and all that that just over propagation of news is why a service like, I remember the first aggregator, what was the other word we were using?
Curator
service that I can remember kind of signing up for was Flipboard.
Yeah.
I remember when Flipboard came around, it was like, okay, so this is kind of cool. Instead of me going to each website of a news source and reading, I can actually just, follow them through a single app and service to use. And Flipboard was pretty great for that. I remember really getting into Flipboard and saying, all right, here I'm following, 12 different news sources and I've chosen all the topics I like. And it's showing me the nice assortment of those news items every day. Every time I go to the app, it would update with some newer news items and show me which ones I've read, which ones I haven't read. And I think that's where it first got me into this idea of, okay, there's an easier way to start digesting news. What I didn't realize it was doing, I think, is what we've already been talking about, is that it was kind of learning what I liked and responded to and making sure that I saw more of that as we went along. So that's important to note. But Flipboard was probably the first place I remember really seeing that news kind of come together in one place. Is that, did you guys have experience with any other news service like that, or was that kind of an early one too?
I did use Flipboard a little bit. I mean, for a long time, I really just went to the different websites because I wanted to look at the different things. And I also like comparing. To me, in a lot of cases with news, there's not bias necessarily in the news story itself. I mean, unless it's an opinion piece, which is completely different.
Sure.
But in the news story itself, there in a lot of cases, there's not as much bias. Where there is bias is what one outlet chooses to cover relative to another outlet.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's, to me, when I would look at different outlets, this outlet's covering this, and this one's completely ignoring it. And so to me, that was where it was interesting. And aggregators and curators don't necessarily show me that this one's covering this and this one is not. Because I think in a lot of cases, that to me is almost as interesting as the news itself. But for those curators, it's, I think the other thing we have to discuss is, this is really what we want as people. I mean, we're talking about, wow, it's really awful because we're creating this echo chamber. Well, we kind of want that. Right. That's kind of what we're asking for. I mean, I only want to see stuff about things that I care about from people that I care about people that I care about. So,
well, I got into a little bit of an argument with somebody just the other day talking about news and the state of news today. And, they were just complaining about how, well, all these news channels, it's all opinion pieces and it's all talking head personalities spouting off their opinions. I said, well, I mean, the fact of the matter is that's what people wanted to watch.
That's what gets the ratings.
So if the ratings were not high for those shows, they would not have those types of shows, but they have those shows because the ratings are high for them because people want to watch those. So you're right. It is giving us what we want as a society, for better or for worse. And, they're well within their right. Yeah. To run a business that way. So
when you turn on the news, whenever you turn on those news outlets at 8:00 at night, it's all opinion.
Yeah.
Completely opinion. I mean, that's all it is. It is no longer news. It is news opinion, which is completely different. That's where a lot of people get confused too, because they don't know the difference between news and news opinion. And I mean, that's okay. That's not necessarily their job to understand that.
Right.
It's also the news job. It's the news outlet's job to explain to us, hey, this is opinion. This isn't news. So, but that's
where
I'll climb off my journalism scholar soapbox for a moment. And
no, this is great because it's kind of a good setup to kind of keep these things in mind, because if we mention any news service, I mean, Apple News has already come up a couple times in our conversation. I think at least a couple of us use Apple News as kind of one source of where we read news. It's still remembering that there's all these factors still in the background that are at play. You're not turning on Apple News and saying, I'm going to get the most unopinionated, clearest view of all the news stories out there on this topic that I can use to evaluate and determine. It's not going to happen. It is going to be skewed by your own personal preference and your own channels you wish to listen to. So, talking about those, let's go ahead and just kind of mention a couple of these news services or news. I keep using the word aggregators, but I understand you guys have got me thinking more about curation as well. But what people may be finding to use as their news source when they go to somewhere on their mobile device or computer as a one-stop shop to get news.
Yeah, Alan, let me start with one because you guys have already mentioned it, and it's one that I just recently went back to, which is Flipboard. Early on, that was what I was using. I thought it was great, but the main reason I thought it was great was because of the navigation. And one of the things I still think it's fantastic is the idea behind Flipboard, right? And getting away from what the news is, the idea of being able to flip through things easier, almost as if you're flipping through the old newspaper and going to the next page and seeing, oh, I want to go to the top of the page. Let me swipe down. Oh, I want to go down here. I'm going to swipe, up and be able to go to a different piece. I think the navigation of Flipboard was really, really great. I think they did a nice job of that. Recently, I went back to it. One, because I was with Apple News for a while, tried a trial of that, went away from it simply because I'm not subscribing to it anymore. But Flipboard is still a really nice version. The way they curate things in terms of viewing them, I think, is really great. Visually, it's exciting. You can kind of see it almost like a magazine, be able to flip through. And I will say with Flipboard, the only thing that I've ever done to curate my news on there, I've never done anything that I think they've got like little hearts you can put next to stories if you like them. I've never done any of that other than going in at the initial part and saying, I like technology, I like sports, I like politics, I like local, I like this, that initial setup. And then I'm assuming it still will curate based on maybe which articles I actually spend time on. I'm sure all of them do that. But I think Flipboard is still great. And it's one that I just recently in the last 2 days went back to trying again. And so I think that's one for people that are interested in something a little bit more visually exciting, interesting. They have started a new channel just for photography, which I think is really where it can hit well because it is so visual, right? The way they have it set up is visually appealing. So they say, here, we think you ought to come back to Flipboard and look at our photography section. And everything's about photography, which, of course, it's kind of nice to be able to flip through visually. So I'll just mention that one as another thing to look in for people. It's free. The one thing that on a lot of these aggregators that's kind of annoyed me over time is that more and more news services are pay services. And so what I want is I want a aggregator that if I get to an article that says, oh, sorry, you don't subscribe to the Washington Post, I want to very quickly say, don't show me any more from the Washington Post because I'm not ready to subscribe for it. That's what I want, is so that I don't get this annoying, like, oh, there's the clickbait, go into it. Oh, you haven't subscribed. You got to pay for this. Now, is that meaning I'm curating myself out of some really good content? Probably. But I also just don't want to pay for a lot of news, So that's something I'll throw out there as something I look at as a must-have for my news aggregators is the ability to be able to turn off things that I don't subscribe to.
I am an Apple News reader. I think, John, you were saying that's at least you have a subscription, whether or not you use it regularly.
I use it all the time.
I do. That's my quick hit. That's my, hey, look, I just want to get a pulse on what's going on and kind of hit some quick articles. And that's what I use, mainly because I'm already subscribed to the rest of the Apple services and it came with it. So I'm all for if I get something bundled in with something else, I'm going to make every effort to try to use it and justify its existence. So Apple News, I'm happy with. I think it's gotten better since its introduction. Overall, I'm pretty comfortable and happy with being able to read content on it and how I kind of go through some different articles. I don't do either, Brian, a lot of the liking and any kind of feedback to the articles. Again, I agree with you. I'm sure it's still noting everything I'm doing, but I'm trying not to give any more direct feedback than I have to. I will say it does bother me, the fact that even though I'm a paid Apple News member, there are still some content subscriptions that it will show in the feed that will lead me to a path where it will not let me
like
watch
a
or read them.
paywall, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Which, again, I agree with you. It'd be nice to kind of filter those out. Maybe there's a way I'm just not aware of it, but I just assume don't tease me with a headline. Don't show me if I really have no intention of subscribing to another newspaper at the moment right now.
Yep.
So that would be nice to have a little more control over it, so I didn't get blinded by those kind of articles. It sounds like that's pretty typical on other services right now as well. So, but overall, the amount of content, I'm happy with the variety of content I get. I'm very happy with the navigation and how well things work. And I like to be able to share from the Apple News pretty easily using the typical Apple share functions of, texting it to other people, airdropping it to other people, all the things you can do that are really nice. I do like Apple News, but I admit I'm also probably a little biased just because I know I'm paying for it and I feel like I need to use it. So,
but we're really not paying for it. That's the thing. I mean, because we have all the other services. So for me, it feels free. I mean, but I use it because it's a good tool. And now, have you used the audio? The audio playback for some of the articles, because I drive about half an hour to work every day, and so sometimes I'll find an article that this will take me a half an hour to read, or I can listen to it on the way to work, and some of those are really awesome.
Oh,
that's a lot of
I
fun.
have done that. Yeah. And again, that's some of the things that Apple can really hone in on and make a kind of a really nice experience for viewers. You're right. I don't feel like I pay for Apple News because my Apple subscription I mainly got because Apple Music. I've got a family of 4, and we all use Apple Music, and we all watch
iCloud,
Apple TV
which you probably
and iCloud. I have a huge iCloud storage for all of our backups. So once you start paying for that, Apple News was kind of here it's part of the bundle, so might as well use it type of thing. So you're right with that.
So guys, let me throw in one more real quick, and just to give love to the other side of the aisle. For probably the last 6 months or so, I've been using Google News. And what I will say I like about Google, well, here's the thing I don't like about Google News, the app, right? One, it's free, right? It's great. And we know Google obviously is getting lots of information from you and being able to curate things in that way. But visually, it's not that exciting, right? It's very bland looking. Here's one thing that really is nice about it. So imagine you've got a feed in the morning, right, where you pull up the app and you've got the headlines kind of in order, right? And it does. Here's the first headline, here's the second headline, all the way down. And you're scrolling down. And most of them are just one article. Here's the first article about, what happened in White House yesterday. Here's Colin Powell just, passed away. Here's the next one, right? On down. And then you get down a little further, and some of the articles are now scrollable left to right. And the way they're scrollable is many articles of the same topic. So this is the part that I really like. So I'm scrolling down and I get to, let's say it's about some sort of military in North Korea, right? There's some sort of North Korea article that's out. And now I'm scrolling up to down and I get to that article and I scroll left to right and I see multiple news outlet versions of the same thing. So which is kind of nice to say, okay, there's one, flip. Look, there's another one talking about the same thing. There's another one talking about the same thing. And they all kind of try to put them together to say these are all about the same idea. So now, if I was to do it correctly, I would probably read through 3 or 4 of them and say, let me look at different approaches or different views of the same thing. So not to say I do that. I usually am a little lazy and maybe go to the first one or the one that looks a little bit more interesting as a title. But I would say that's kind of nice. It's really easy also. There's the 3 dots next to each one of them that says, click and say, don't show me any more from this source or about this topic. If, for example, I go in and it's a paywall, I'll just click and turn off the paywall and say, don't show me any more of those because I don't want to get frustrated getting to a particular paywall and then have to turn around. So I'll say Google News is not bad. It's free for those who aren't paying for services and want something. If you're already a Google user, if you already realize that Google has all your information anyway, so maybe download that app and try that. It's a good way to get your simple news. And it also has an email subscription thing where you can say, send me the top news every morning to my email account. So I like that. I like when the service has the ability to give me the headlines. Give me 2 minute email. So it's the first thing I get to work and I can quickly scan the email, the headlines, the top 10, and then I can go look for more stuff. So
Now is that still in beta?
I don't think so.
You joke, but I mean, I think it may be. I don't know.
It very well could be. It very well could be. I don't know. It's I'll tell you, it is not the most attractive app. It's not the most the user interface is not the most attractive thing. So I would not be surprised. But I've been using it now for about 6 months. Like I said, I went back to Flipboard just recently for the visual navigation is just so nice within that app. And there's a lot of them. So, Flipboard, Smart News, Pocket, which has its own unique thing, right, where you can save and be able to read offline and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So. Pocket was kind of interesting. I did use Pocket for a while, but again, keeping in mind Pocket's not an aggregator as much as you find all your articles online and then you can save them into one place, and it creates for you very much a Flipboard type of Apple News type of environment of your articles you've saved, which is good. That actually probably is for a different type of person that says, look, I don't need somebody to tell me what news to read. I'm going to go out and find the news I want, but I want to have it all in one easy to digest place to read at my own leisure. And that's really what Pocket's so great for. Now I'll admit too, I'm a Twitter user. I'm a heavy Twitter reader and follower. And I do have I have a actual list. One of my Twitter lists I follow is just news sources. So then when I go to my news list, it's only just headlines, from all these different news sources.
Yep.
That to me is like when you turn on the spigot. That's like, okay, I don't want to look at it in a nice magazine type format on Apple News. I just want to just open up the fire hydrant and let me just drink straight from it and just see all the news coming in right at the moment. It's also if I want to look for something timely. If I'm looking at timely news, something that's happened like within hours, I'll typically will go to Twitter and use that as kind of my aggregated news filter. Because I'm going to see it right away, as opposed to a Apple News. It may be hours before that nice article's written up about it and published and propagated out. So an interesting bit about Twitter. So just so you know, 13% of users get their news, or adults get their news from Twitter. So you're among them. I am much more in that camp than I am the Facebook, by all means. I kind of block out all news sources on Facebook in general. So John.
Do you remember the Miracle on the Hudson, where the Captain Sully landed the airplane? That actually was kind of a seminal point in Twitter's history, because that was the first time that a live news story was really carried on Twitter. And it was a guy that was on the ferry that he saw the plane land on the Hudson and tweeted out that, we're going to rescue these passengers, crazy. And basically that was the start of using Twitter to get news like that. And the challenge there, of course, that is that, at that point he was a reporter. And, and using Twitter, we can all be reporters, I guess. And that may not necessarily be a good thing, because if, in this case, there was no agenda to be had, but what if there was? What if he hated the airlines for one reason or another? Yeah. And, his reporting of that incident could have been very different than what it was. And so,
you're right.
That's another piece, when you're reading from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Washington Post, etc. Those are paid, we think, professional reporters. Whereas if it's not, if it's Facebook or Twitter, it could be me posting about whatever I want. And, and we know actually how that's turned out because of the way that, the way that there's a lot of fake news out there right now. And that's from, people like you and me. Well, not like you and me, but people who don't have any business writing news, creating news.
Well, it's almost reason. I think what's interesting too is, you talking about Twitter specifically, what I notice visually and mentally as I scan through Twitter is that solid news sources and those individuals who are now self-appointed reporters have equal visibility. I'll be scanning through a Twitter feed And seeing a photograph that somebody posted up on their own with their own headline, their own story they wrote, almost has visually as much weight and as importance as a CBS News headline thing.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be a lot more conscious of what you're looking at, because if you're just kind of consuming it all, it's very easy how that could start to shape the direction of the news you receive and the messages you get.
Yeah.
There's been several times I've gone on Twitter to see about something that I know is just now happening, and the first early post I see about it, come to find out hours later, are very distorted on what really happened, but yet that was the ones that we saw first, and it's kind of what we remember or what we think about that event now. So,
and that,
I love
that particular
Twitter.
skewed version has now been shared 1 million times since then,
Yes.
right? So
I
it's
love
propagated
Twitter,
out,
but I do realize that I really only use Twitter for news. If I really want to hear something of the moment, what's happening right now, and I want to see a lot of different activity around it. But yeah, I think it's all good points, John, that we got to keep in mind with something like Twitter or Facebook or any of these places. Yeah.
Well, and chances are some of the people that shared that news were other news outlets. I mean, that's the thing. It's because of the competition to get the news out quickly. Before, when I was in journalism school, you need to have 3 sources, 3 unrelated sources for anything that you print. Well, I mean, now you don't have time for that anymore. They've got to get the news out, because if they don't, if I as an individual break the news, it's still as valuable as if CNN breaks it.
Yep.
So CNN is racing me, and I have no journalism ethics, or in theory, I don't have any requirement for journalism ethics, while CNN does.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're racing it against me. And so that creates a huge issue.
I had never really thought of it in that terms, but wow, that you're right. I mean, it's kind of crazy all of a sudden, because there's times where I see a CNN or somebody else basically putting up the same content that another news source did or another place did. And there's no way they're getting 3 sources verification on these things in that time. So wow, it has changed quite a bit of how we see the news that we come across. For better or for worse, I'm still happy to know that I can get access to all these news sources so quickly and easily. But the downside is, like you said, John, it's you got to really be a little more careful about what you read and how you digest it. And
you need to be willing to change your mind over time and recognize that the news that you get today may not necessarily be the same news as more information becomes available. And so that's that's an important consideration to make whenever you think about news.
Yeah. I think what I'm taking from all this is that we should just go back to watching cartoons, and we should really stop looking at news at all. Okay. No, but let me bring up really quick. I mentioned this already, the idea of the kind of morning newsletter. This is one of the things that I've started doing more now recently, is kind of getting, what are the, top 10 news items delivered to me in the morning, so that I can at least get a very quick scan of what's happening in the world. And I think also, going back to our previous discussion, potentially being a little bit more thought through as to what's going to be put in that email, as opposed to like, oh, let's just get the fire hydrant out. But one of the things that I've started to listen to, Alan, I think I sent it to you, right? The Morning Brew. Did you start using that? One example of this where you subscribe to them. Of course, it is completely their curated decision as to what they're giving you. But to me, this has made a much more palatable version of the news, where in the morning I get up, I'm reading an email that has already been put together. It's already saying, well, here's some of the top news items of the day with links to other things. If you want to go read more about it, you can do that with a decent little spin on it, potentially a humorous spin on some of those things. And there's a bunch of these, the Skim, the Need to Know. They're basically news aggregators that are putting together information and sending it out to you via email, as opposed to you going and having to search and find what's up to date, right? One of the things I struggle with is that idea of Facebook is like, if it's constantly coming in, it means that people constantly want to go and look for it, which means we're constantly addicted to it, right? Whereas if I can start to get maybe I get my morning news delivered to me and my afternoon or evening news after work delivered to me. And if I know I'm going to get a pretty good sandwich of news there and not have to worry about in the middle of the day, what's happening, I think it potentially makes my world a little more enjoyable. So I've started to do that myself. I've started to get a email sent to me in the morning for some of these, read through that, which is a more positive spin on the news. It's a lot of it's finance and, hey, here's kind of an interesting, tidbit about today in history, that sort of thing. And then at the end of the day, when I'm coming home, I'm listening to maybe an NPR, maybe a BBC, today in the news sort of thing. So at least I get the wrap up of what happened today. And so I don't know, do you guys use either of those kind of ideas, the morning email, the, afternoon kind of recap of the day, John?
Well, Apple has that kind of morning news digest. And so it's got, 10 stories or so that I kind of scan through. And I tell you, talk about a rabbit hole. I mean, this morning I actually went down one of those rabbit holes. The next thing I know, I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to get to work. Because they do a good job.
My God, it's 11 o'clock in the morning, and I haven't left my PJs yet. I had a class at 8 a.m. What am I doing?
God, I know more about the news than I've never known. But they know what I like, and it's based on, not because I clicked like, it's because Mims clicked in on this story. He must like this.
He spends
and
time on that.
The more I watch and the more I read, the more they kind of figure me out. And I mean, it's, and they're all doing that. I mean, that's not to pick on Apple News by any means. I think that's just, and there again, we say this is a bad thing, but it may not be, that's because that's what I want. And if it's news that I don't care about, then who wins?
It's true.
Alan, what about you? Are you using that sort of thing?
I get a news email in the morning and kind of a digest from a couple different places and just kind of scan through those. I typically try not to look at any more news the rest of the day, but I do listen to it's like an NPR kind of news recap, like 10, 15 minute podcast on the way home in the afternoon. To me, that kind of works better for the flow of me. I don't like to hear the news in the morning on the podcast because I kind of like to, I don't know, just have a nice, enjoyable way, drive into work. But on the way home, kind of get a sense of what's going on during the day in general, what happened yesterday. So that's kind of my thing. And then I hop into Apple News sometimes, at night if I'm just, it's kind of like, if you're like the old stereotypical guy comes home, has his pipe, kicks his shoes off, and is reading the newspaper. That's kind of my flow on, I'm at home, I'm ready to relax. I'll read through. That's today. My Apple News reading at that point where I can, especially I do have the subscription to let you do the magazines on Apple News as well as part of that. And I do read a lot more magazine articles kind of in the evening where I want to dig deeper into a topic a little bit more. So it's all good. I do think really quick, I know, Brian, you mentioned a couple things that were features for you. You felt like were really kind of must-haves. And I do think it's important with any of these services. I mean, it has to be something that works for you, both layout, navigation, how easy it is to get to the stuff. I mean, there's nothing worse than having a tool like this that may have some great content, but it's really difficult to find what you're looking for or to read it or to enjoy it appropriately. So, and like John mentioned, I really like those services that are doing more with audio versions of some of their stories and other ways you can digest it than just reading text. Many of them including videos inside their stories now and just some different ways to absorb the story. So all that I think is really important. But
can I mention one more thing? Can I mention one more real quick? Is just having a reader view, having something where you can turn off the videos or the advertisements and be able to click and say, just give me the text, right? And having a really good version of that. Not all of them are very good at that. Some of them will say they have a reader view and they only get you the content up to the first video and then that's it and you lose everything else. But having a really good version of kind of the reader view, which for people that don't know, it just strips out everything else and just gives you the text. that's the way I want to read a news. I don't want to sit and have to click through next to see 20 different pages of the same article, right? You just want to be able to see the text. So, when you're looking at these things, I think navigation is important because it can be very frustrating. I really despise having some where I swipe back to the left to get back to the news list, but then others, if they do that, it goes to the next article, and it's a little quirky. So navigation has to be consistent and clean. I think being able to control subscriptions so you're not running into paywalls all the time. To me, having integration with other avenues to be able to expand, get the video, get all these things without making a lot of clicks, and then the reader view. Those are my big to-dos. You have to have those in order to get me as a subscriber. So
fair enough. All right. Anybody other closing thoughts on news apps, news services, anything?
Even if you're reading news from the echo chamber, it's good to be at least informed.
Yeah.
Even if it's of one point of view. I mean,
that's the thing. I there was a period of time where I tried shutting off the news for a while to say, look, I'm going to see if I can kind of function in my society without always having to know what's going on around me and reading the news stories. And it was really tough. I think it's like you said, John, even if unfortunately some of the news sources can still be very slanted or opinionated, I still think it's more important to be in the know than not. And you're right about that for sure. So you keep teaching those kids at your university about the importance of journalism and ethics when reporting the news. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the main takeaway here, Alan, is everybody just needs to listen to Brothers in Tech, and that's the only news source you really need.
That's
right. This is really all you need, right?
Think about how much happier and safer a world we'd have.
This is great.
If that was your only source of news.
This is a safe space.
It is a safe space. I feel really good about it. So that's great.
All right.
Well, fun. John, thank you for being a part of this conversation. I think your background and what you spend your days doing would just really help add to the conversation. So, because anytime we talk about news, I mean, we can get soaked up in the tech side, but I think there's a lot of things we got to keep in mind about how this whole news industry is working these days. And appreciate your insight on that.
Absolutely. Really cool. Well, and technology's driving all that news stuff too. I mean, that's really what it boils down to.
Yeah. Well, and I know just again, there's so many new ways for people to get news through technology than we ever had before. So it's important to make some good decisions and make sure you know what you're getting and what you're reading and seeing. So, all right. Well, that is today's Brothers in Tech. But Brian, if somebody else has some thoughts about news services and news apps and they want to contact us or maybe give us a suggestion of another news service or app they've been using that might be a good alternative to consider, how should they get a hold of us for that?
Yeah, well, you can either tweet at us and kind of give us the news before anybody else and skew that your own
breaking
way.
News.
Or you can send us an email at info@themesh.tv. That's info@themesh.tv. Tell us what topics you'd like us to get into or cool news aggregators or curators that you think we ought to check out. So info@themesh.tv.
All right. And again, thank you, John Mims, for joining us again this week. We're really happy to have you here. And we'll look forward to getting you back on sometime.
I'd love to do it. It's a lot of fun.
Good conversations. Awesome. All right.
Thanks, John.
Thanks a lot. Brian, thank you. Good seeing you as always.
All right.
And thank you, everybody.
Tell the family I said hello, Alan.
Same here. Do the same. Actually, John, tell your family we said hello.
Oh, yeah. Do that too.
Hello's all the way around.
That.
Well, take care, guys. We'll see y'all later.
All right. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Check us out online at themesh.tv. Discover other network shows and give us feedback on what you just heard.